Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive, truly landmark Philippine Supreme Court decision regarding two environmental activists, Jonola Castro and Jed Tamano. We're going to look closely at how a highly publicized, frankly shocking press conference led the highest court in the land to step in and deploy two extraordinary legal remedies, the writ of Amparo and the writ of Habeas data. All right, let's just jump right into the climax of the story. Picture this. It's September 19, 2023. The government has set up this big press conference. The authorities fully expected Jonola and Jed to publicly confirm that they had voluntarily surrendered as rebels. But instead, they dropped an absolute bombshell on live television. Jonola just comes out and says, "The truth is, we were abducted by the military." I mean, they used the exact platform designed to showcase their surrender to declare to the whole world that they were actually taken against their will. Talk about a clash of narratives, right? On one side of the stage, you've got the military insisting that these activists were there because of a voluntary surrender, and they even had signed affidavits to back it up. But on the exact opposite side, Jonola and Jed are publicly declaring that they were kidnapped, held captive, and completely coerced into signing those documents. So suddenly the Supreme Court is faced with having to untangle this huge, highly public contradiction.
Part 1. Anatomy of an Abduction. Let's flash back to September 2nd, 2023.
To get why the Supreme Court had to step in, we've got to look at the timeline the court actually evaluated. And according to the petition, the chain of events is, frankly, deeply unsettling. On the evening of September 2nd, Jonola and Jed were just walking in Bataan when they were taken. From September 5th to the 11th, they claimed they faced continuous interrogations and were forced to write and rewrite affidavits adopting this pre-prepared narrative about surrendering as rebels. By September 12th, they're transferred to a military camp, which ultimately leads us to that fateful press conference on the 19th. So, what exactly happened during those missing weeks? The court looked at some incredibly stark details laid out in the petition. The activists stated they were violently shoved into an SUV by armed men wearing ski masks. Their hands were tied, they were blindfolded, and get this, their heads were actually wrapped in duct tape to completely seal their vision. Over the next few days, while surviving on just meager rations of dried fish and eggs, they were aggressively interrogated about their affiliations, their laptops, and even their phone passwords. And the psychological pressure? It was off the charts. The activists testified to receiving some chilling threats from their captors. We're talking about being told things like, "We will put you in the same grave if you don't speak, and we aren't afraid to kill." It was under this immense, terrifying pressure, fearing for their actual lives, that the petition claims the women finally broke down and signed those pre-written affidavits. Moving on to Part 2, the writ of Amparo, the ultimate civilian shield against enforced disappearance. This brings us right to the first of two incredibly powerful legal tools the Supreme Court pulled out for this case. Now, fun fact, Amparo actually translates to protection or refuge in Spanish, and the whole concept traces back to 19th century Mexican law. Here in the Philippines, it's a special prerogative writ. It's a lifeline for anyone whose right to life, liberty, and security is threatened. But crucially, the Supreme Court designed it specifically to shatter the expectation of impunity in cases involving extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances. It's an extraordinary remedy built for extraordinary circumstances where courts need to act fast. The court was incredibly meticulous here. To grant the writ, they painstakingly checked the activist ordeal against four very strict legal elements that define an enforced disappearance. 1. A deprivation of liberty. 2. That it was carried out with state authorization or support. 3. A refusal to acknowledge the person's fate or whereabouts. And 4. The intention to remove them from the protection of the law for a prolonged period. But here's the real question. How did they actually prove it? Well, in Amparo cases, the court uses what's called a totality of evidence standard. They literally looked at everything. They had sworn statements from eyewitnesses who saw the abduction happen in plain sight. They looked at photos of Jonola and Jed's sandals and slippers just left behind on the street after the struggle. And maybe most importantly, they observed the undeniably coercive environment of that live press conference, where these activists spoke out against the official narrative while literally surrounded by the military. For the court, all of this combined was substantial evidence of a forced disappearance.
Part 3. The writ of Habeas data, protecting privacy in life, liberty, and security.
You know, securing physical freedom was really just half the battle. Even after they were finally released to the Commission on Human Rights and their families, there was this lingering, ongoing threat. And that's what activated the writ of habeas data. People often mistakenly think habeas data is just some standard internet privacy law. It is way more profound than that. It is a crucial defense against the weaponization of your personal information. It protects you when authorities unlawfully collect or store your data and then use it to threaten your life, liberty, or security.
So why pull this trigger now? Well, right after that wild press conference, a high-ranking official from the National Security Council went on national television. He publicly stated that the council would expose all information they have on Janila and Jed, and even threaten them with perjury charges. The Supreme Court looked at this open, verbalized threat from a government official, an official who openly admitted to storing data on these activists, and deemed it a direct, actionable danger to their security.
Now you might be wondering, why go straight to the Supreme Court for this? Usually you'd start at the lower courts, right? Well, the Supreme Court assumes concurrent direct jurisdiction when a habeas data case involves public data files of government offices, because a national security official was overtly threatening to leak official government-held files. The Supreme Court allowed them to bypass the lower courts entirely. They needed to act immediately to shut down this pressing informational threat.
Which brings us to Part 4, the court's final orders, immediate legal protection and next steps.
Looking at all this substantial evidence of severe threats to both their physical safety and their data privacy, the Supreme Court didn't mess around. They took decisive action. First, they formally granted both the writs of amparo and habeas data. On top of that, they immediately threw down a temporary protection order, or TPO. This is a strict legal shield banning the respondents, the military, police, everyone named in the case, from coming within 1 kilometer radius of the activists, their homes, or their schools. And finally, they directed the Court of Appeals to conduct a rapid summary hearing to hammer out permanent protection orders.
This whole explainer really underscores a landmark decision. It's a clear instance of the highest court stepping up as a crucial safety net for citizens in distress. But it leaves us with a pretty profound question to think about as we wrap up today. What happens to our civil liberties when the very institutions meant to protect citizens are the ones accused of taking them away? It is a stark reminder of just how fragile human rights can be, and why we absolutely need a robust, impartial judiciary that's willing to deploy extraordinary tools when the truth demands it.